For centuries, the stars have captivated the human imagination, objects of endless fascination and mystery. From ancient mariners to modern-day scientists, gazing at the night sky has always stirred within us the profound sense that we may not be alone. Yet this curiosity also casts a shadow, one that stretches far beyond our understanding. When darkness is absolute, the unknown seems to inch closer, and sometimes, only sometimes, it does so quite literally. In the summer of 1976, 4 young men set out in search of solitude. Longing to disconnect from urban life, they ventured into the tranquil expanse of the Maine wilderness in the United States. What was meant to be a peaceful escape would soon unravel into a harrowing ordeal, an episode of terror that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A nightmare buried within fragments of the night. Northern Maine is a region carved by rushing rivers and cloaked in dense coniferous forests. Deep, mirror-like lakes reflect the vast summer sky, creating an idyllic setting for those seeking refuge far from the city's noise. It was here that Jack and Jim Weiner, along with their friends Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, decided to embark on one final adventure before returning to college. All 4 were students at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston. Their plan was simple: a 14-day expedition exploring the Allagash River and its surroundings. With only essential supplies packed, they launched their canoes onto the calm waters of Eagle Lake. The first night passed uneventfully, just a typical evening around the campfire, marked by laughter and a sense of ease. But everything began to change on the second night when their reality slowly began to fracture. That evening, Jim Weiner noticed something highly unusual: a strange light hovering above the treetops, perfectly still and slightly larger than a star. Intrigued, Jim raised his binoculars and focused on the anomaly. For several long, tense seconds he studied the glowing object, suspended in eerie silence. Then, without warning, it vanished, as though swallowed by the night itself. A deep unease instantly settled over the group. But in true youthful fashion, they responded the only way they knew how: by laughing it off, brushing it aside as a joke. Among themselves, they spoke cautiously about what they had witnessed, convinced that no one would ever believe them. Still, they were determined to enjoy the rest of their trip and chose to set the unsettling experience aside. What they didn't realize, however, was that it was only the beginning. On the 4th night, after lighting a large campfire, the group decided to take advantage of the lake's nighttime tranquility and set out for some evening fishing. They rowed quietly across the dark waters, never venturing far from the reassuring glow of the flames back on shore. It was then that Chuck felt a chill run down his spine, an indescribable sensation, as though unseen eyes were watching him from some hidden recess of the forest. Acting on instinct, he turned his head, and there it was again, the same strange light they had seen days earlier. Only now it was much closer and far more intense. Chuck would later describe it as a miniature sun, a radiant sphere that seemed to possess a life of its own. Its glow lit up the forest as if it were broad daylight. But what unsettled them most was the utter silence. The object emitted no sound at all. By all logic, something that large and luminous should have roared with an engine, or, at the very least, produced a hum like that of a helicopter. Instead, it was an unnatural, bone-chilling silence. The 4 friends immediately felt threatened. In a desperate attempt to communicate, or perhaps to make sense of the object's presence, Chuck aimed his flashlight at the sphere and began flashing an SOS signal. To their astonishment, the light responded. It began gliding along the shoreline, steadily moving closer with a terrifying calm. Overwhelmed by fear, panic set in. What had initially sparked awe and curiosity now gave way to sheer terror. They dropped their flashlights and began paddling frantically toward the shore. The light from the object cast their canoe's shadow across the water in front of them, tracking their every move. When they finally reached land, they looked up and saw the orb hovering directly overhead. It was so low, Chuck estimated they could have struck it with a rock. Then, in an instant, the sphere shot into the night sky, shrinking rapidly into a tiny point that soon became indistinguishable from the stars. The immediate danger seemed to have passed, but an unsettling stillness lingered. Strangely, what disturbed them most wasn't the object's presence. It was the unnatural calm that followed. There were no screams, no panic, only a disquieting serenity. It was as if something had drained their emotions and dulled their thoughts. They were aware that they should feel anxious, terrified even, but they didn't. And even that absence of fear failed to alarm them. All 4 agreed on one thing. At most, they estimated they had been out on the water for around 20 minutes. Yet the campfire they had left burning, large enough to last for several hours, had already been reduced to ashes. It was impossible not to sense that something was profoundly wrong. And no matter how hard they tried, none of them could recall how they had returned to shore. They remembered fishing on the lake, paddling back toward land and watching as the glowing orb ascended into the night sky. But the journey in between was missing, completely erased from their memories. It was as if an entire fragment of time had been forcibly removed from their minds. Defying all logic, they didn't sit down to discuss what had happened, as any other group of young people might have done in such a situation. Instead, they were overcome by an overwhelming exhaustion and went to sleep almost immediately. The next morning, without speaking a word about the incident, they packed up camp and continued their journey. Over the following days, they explored various parts of Maine as though nothing had happened. The mysterious orb of light never appeared again during that expedition. At the end of their vacation, once they had returned home, they shared the experience with a small circle of friends and family. But no one believed them. Worse yet, people hinted that as art students, it was only natural for them to fabricate vivid, fantastical stories. Over time, even the details began to fade. What had once been a terrifying experience began to feel like the vague memory of a strange dream. For more than a decade, that night became little more than a bizarre anecdote from their university years. But for some of them, the memories of Allagash would not remain buried forever. In 1988, 12 years after the incident, Jim Weiner finally confessed something he had kept to himself all that time. He had been suffering from recurring nightmares ever since that summer. The dreams were disturbingly vivid and always followed the same pattern: a sterile, brightly lit room, resembling that of a hospital, where he and his 3 friends lay beside one another. Naked and in the same condition, Jim would see himself lying on a metallic table, paralyzed by a strange device pressing against his chest. Around him stood several beings, watching him intently. They were not human, though their anatomy was disturbingly close. Large heads, slender bodies, and enormous black, pupil-less eyes that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. What horrified him most wasn't the sight itself, but the overwhelming sense of powerlessness. He wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but he couldn't move. Determined to uncover the truth, Jim finally opened up to his brother Jack about the dreams. Jack's response chilled him to the bone. He had been having the exact same dreams, frightened by the implications and haunted by the possibility that something truly traumatic had occurred during their expedition. The Weiner brothers sought help from Ray Fowler, a respected researcher and specialist in the field, in cases involving alleged alien abductions. Ray Fowler, an expert with years of investigative experience, proposed a common method used in such situations: regressive hypnosis. Through hypnosis, it was believed that repressed memories could be retrieved, fragments of truth the conscious mind had either buried on its own or, as Fowler theorized, had been deliberately suppressed by external forces. The 4 friends agreed to undergo the sessions. Even Charlie and Chuck, who had not experienced the recurring nightmares, chose to participate. The results were staggering. Under hypnosis, each of them described scenes that mirrored the terrifying dreams Jim had been suffering for years. They all recalled being taken aboard an unfamiliar craft, placed on examination tables, and surrounded by beings who, although they made no direct physical harm, radiated an overwhelming sense of menace and chilling detachment. Their hypnotic testimonies aligned with uncanny precision, so much so that the likelihood of them having conspired beforehand seemed implausible. They described the same arched metallic structures, strange exploratory instruments, and a shared sense of complete helplessness. Reduced to little more than test subjects in an experiment far beyond their comprehension, independently, each one drew sketches based on the vivid images from their recovered memories. All 4 claimed they had been taken aboard a spacecraft, forced to undress and subjected to what appeared to be medical examinations. They recalled the collection of skin samples, bodily fluids, blood, and urine. The drawings they produced after their sessions were disturbingly consistent in both form and detail. As skepticism and accusations of fabrication grew, the group voluntarily submitted to polygraph examinations. All 4 passed the lie detector tests, firmly denying any attempt to invent or embellish their story. The results were definitive. No signs of deception were detected. What had begun as a private search for answers soon escalated into a media sensation. The story of the 4 friends began circulating far beyond their immediate circles. The public's fascination intensified, and the press seized every opportunity to expose even the smallest details. They were eventually invited onto the Joan Rivers show, where they recounted their harrowing experience before a national audience of millions. Soon after, the Allagash Abduction case would be featured in one of the most iconic investigations of its kind. The case was eventually featured on one of the most popular mystery shows of its time, Unsolved Mysteries. The audience was captivated. The story had all the elements of a science fiction narrative, brought disturbingly into the real world: strange lights in the sky, missing memories, recurring nightmares, revealing hypnosis, and the lingering anxiety of never truly knowing what had transpired during those lost hours of the summer of 1976. Speculation abounded. Some saw the account as irrefutable evidence that humanity is not alone in the universe. Others, more skeptical, argued that the story had been meticulously crafted to attract media attention and achieve instant fame. The debate grew more intense when critics questioned the reliability of hypnosis as a tool for memory retrieval. Numerous experts warned that such techniques can lead to false memories, influenced either by suggestion or by the expectations of those undergoing the sessions. Furthermore, the time lapse, more than 12 years between the original experience and the hypnosis, did little to strengthen the case's credibility. There were even claims that as art students, the group may have used their trip as an opportunity to experiment with hallucinogenic substances, and that the entire story could have been a drug-induced fantasy. Despite these doubts, there remained one element that even the harshest skeptics couldn't dismiss: the genuine emotional distress displayed by each of the men when recounting their experience. This didn't appear to be a performance for the cameras. Their voices trembled with fear, and their pain was unmistakably real, palpable in every interview and television segment. Although disagreements and conflicting statements among the group would surface years later, casting some doubt on the story's consistency, the Allagash abduction remains one of the most compelling and widely discussed alien abduction cases in United States history. I hope you found this story as fascinating as I did. As always, thank you for being here tonight, enjoying yet another chilling tale or legend with us. You're warmly invited to subscribe and join this growing community.